Hi, my name is Seamus Bruner, and you're watching The Rebound with Coach Doherty.
Welcome to The Rebound with Coach Matt Doherty.
Welcome to The Rebound. I'm Matt Doherty, and I'll be your host. On this show, we explore remarkable rebound stories of resilience and recovery, revealing the strength and determination within individuals that inspire us all. Back with us today is Seamus Bruner, investigative journalist and author of 𝐃𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐥. In his book, Seamus, who led the teams whose findings sparked multiple FBI investigations and congressional probes into the Clintons and the Bidens, exposes the billionaires who control the levers of power that dominate every aspect of our lives. Seamus, thank you for coming back on the show. A lot has happened since I interviewed you in May. Namely, Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden as the Democratic presidential candidate. With the presidential election only several days away, what do you see from where you sit?
Yeah, that's right, Coach. Good to be back with you. The old switcheroo, we kind of suspected it might happen, and here it is. Kamala Harris has been a total radical, and we just had a piece actually come out on her time as the Attorney General in California, where she looked the other way, swept under the rug a massive spy operation, Chinese spies electioneering in California. So this kind of just flies right in the face of her repeated attempts to paint herself as this tough on crime prosecutor. It also highlights another report that we just came out, the top 50 election threats in 2024. So there are 50 things that threaten our election. Kamala Harris has experience in many of these things, but foreign influence, she's a big, foreign influence candidate. So that's a big problem.
You opened it up. You started with 50 things about this upcoming election, 50 threats. Tell us what they are.
Yeah, so we break the threats into 5 categories because there's so many of them. And so the first category is dark money. Dark money is a huge problem, and that kind of begins before ballots are ever printed, let alone cast. And in the dark money category, we've got all kinds of things like straw donor schemes. Specifically, we looked into the ActBlue smurfing operations. There is now evidence that ActBlue, this would be the big fundraising platform that the left uses, is susceptible to straw donor schemes. And so a straw donor scheme, it's a crime, is when someone makes a donation in the name of someone else. And so this happens when people want to bypass campaign finance limits. You can only donate $3,300 in the primary and $3,300 in the general, $3,300, $6,600 total to a particular candidate. There's a limit on it. Once you hit that $6,600, that limit, you can't give any more to the candidate's campaign. And so then you have to go other avenues like super PACs and things like that. But there's a reason why you would want to go higher than $6,600 to the campaign. They get all kinds of benefits like cheaper advertising. So there's evidence that's going on the ActBlue platform, possibly even on the WinRed platform, which is the Republican platform. That's the dark money category. There's a bunch of other things in that, foreign funding and all of that. Then we get into the next step in this election threats report is get out the vote operations. Get out the vote operations include things like registering people to vote. We have a huge section on non-citizen voting. It would stun you how easy it is to get non-citizens onto the voter rolls. I mean, there's been 10 million, possibly more, non-citizens, illegal aliens who have come into this country through our southern border under Biden-Harris, and now they're making their ways on the voter rolls. In Ohio, just the other day, 6 individuals were busted for voting in this cycle in the primaries, and they're non-citizens. You're not allowed to vote if you're not a citizen of this country. At least you shouldn't be able to. But states all over the country are finding thousands, tens of thousands of non-citizens. We calculated over 33,000 non-citizens that had made it onto the voter rolls and are now, it takes huge legal battles to get them off the voter rolls, which brings me to the third category, lawfare. Lawfare has at least 10 threats of the 50 in this report. And this covers things like rogue prosecutors, like the ones who have been charging President Trump with all of these charges that are now getting kind of thrown out. Fani Willis, Alvin Bragg, Letitia James, you know their names. Lawfare also is what the Biden administration is doing to keep these voter rolls dirty. They are actually backing the secretaries of states in, let's say, states like Arizona or Pennsylvania or Michigan, when people try to clean up the voter rolls, get the non-citizens off of the rolls. The secretaries of state, many of them backed by George Soros, like Jocelyn Benson in Michigan and the guy in Arizona, Adrian Fontes, they just found 218,000 people are currently going to vote in the 2024 election who have never shown proof of citizenship. I mean, that's just staggering. And so that's election swinging numbers. We found in this report over 1 million potential voters who could swing the election in 2024 that shouldn't even be on the voter rolls to begin with. So it's really stunning stuff. The last two categories are voter fraud, which is when the individual commits voter fraud, like the one person cheats, and then election fraud, which is when the officials rig the election. And so both of those things, when it comes down to the counting and the signature matching, that would be election fraud when they loosen up the signature matching, for example. Voter fraud would be when you vote twice. Like, let's say you moved from Florida to North Carolina, and you still get a ballot in Florida, and you can then get a ballot in North Carolina, voting twice, duplicate voting. That's voter fraud. That's a crime. People are being convicted of this all the time.
We mentioned before the show the influence of China. China hadn't been discussed too much. You mentioned it earlier with Kamala and when she was Attorney General, and the influence and how she brushed that under the rug. Tell us their impact in this election, maybe that some people aren't talking about. I believe you broke a story called Service Central about Tim Walz. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. It makes sense that California is highly susceptible to Chinese influence. It's the closest state. It has a huge population in San Francisco, which is where Kamala Harris was the district attorney, and then she became the attorney general of that state. There's a huge Chinese population in California and a lot of influence operations going on there. What doesn't make as much sense is the state of Minnesota. I mean, it's in the middle of the country, way up north where it's cold. Why is there such a Chinese presence, Chinese influence operation presence? CCP, these aren't dissidents who fled the communist country and are now here living out their American dream. I mean, there are many of people like that, and we welcome those people. But in Minnesota, we have found some really shocking stuff. There are these things called overseas Chinese service centers. Some people have dubbed them secret police stations. There's the FBI actually busted one of these things in New York City not too long ago. And the one in New York City its purpose was to surveil and harass and possibly even disappear these good dissident Chinese, the people who have fled the communist country to come to America to make a better life. Well, the CCP doesn't like that. And they don't like when Chinese Americans post negative things about the Chinese Communist Party. There was actually a University of Minnesota student who went back to visit his family. And when he was there, he was arrested because he had posted some memes on social media of Xi Jinping looking like Winnie the Pooh. I mean, that is how strict the Chinese Communist Party is against any sort of criticism from Chinese Americans. Well, this overseas service center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, it's in the Twin Cities. It's between Minneapolis and St. Paul. We found directors of this thing totally loyal to the Chinese Communist Party, CCP operatives. It's filled with them. I mean, you'd be stunned at the number of organizations that are loyal to China operating out of Minnesota. One of these guys, he donated to Tim Walz's campaigns. He has been seen in multiple photos with Tim Walz. He's affiliated with the entities who have hired Tim Walz to be the keynote speaker at their events. And then here's the kicker. these organizations are getting Minnesota taxpayer grants from the Tim Walz government. Over $200,000 we have seen of Minnesota money going to Chinese cutouts and front organizations for the Communist Party.
Unbelievable. You wrote a great book that I reference all the time, Control Oligarchs, and about the influence of some of the most powerful people in the world, namely Jeff Bezos, George Soros, Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab. How do you think they're influencing this election?
Oh, it's enormous. It's enormous. Bill Gates and Jamie Dimon, who's the head of JP Morgan, it was just released this week from Axios, are secretly pouring $50 million into Kamala's campaign. A lot of the other control oligarchs in the book have poured tens of millions of dollars into Kamala's campaign. They really want a Harris administration, Harris-Walz administration, and they ultimately want to bring us closer to China. It's not a coincidence that China favors these people and that these people favor China. During the pandemic, Bill Gates could not stop praising the Chinese response to COVID, the zero COVID, which was totally authoritarian. And it's not a coincidence that these people want more censorship, just like in China. A lot of people think that the reason the tech guys and other control oligarchs in the book favor China is just because they want to do business there, and that is true. But what they really want is a system very much like China, where freedom of speech is stifled. John Kerry just recently said that this election is so important so that we can, if John Kerry's people get in, they can go after the First Amendment. They don't want people to be able to speak about them in any sort of negative way, just like China.
Seamus, let's continue the conversation on the influence of the big money that you talk about in your book. And you were talking about how they want us to get closer as a country to China, and that our fear, your concern is that if Harris wins, they'll be able to really influence her and the administration to become more like China. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the control oligarchs, the book is all about how these guys want a system of greater control, and they want to control what foods you can eat. They want to control what medicines you must put into your body. They want to control our information. I mean, that's one of the most critical things. There was actually recently a big report on George Soros buying up Odyssey. It's one of the largest audio broadcasting networks, 220 radio stations. Soros takes that over, and he's able to exert enormous control over what's said on the airwaves. But they need the power. These control oligarchs need the power of the government. That's why they love the Chinese system so much. The Chinese system is a hybrid model of capitalism and authoritarianism. It's a working together of the government with the private sector. And so they get to privatize all of the profits deep, right into their own pockets, don't have to spread any wealth, but they get to socialize the losses. We cover all of the bad ideas, the bad bets that people like Bill Gates or George Soros have. They love that system. That's what they have in China, but they also get the control aspect of it all so that they can shut down any sort of dissent and shut down any sort of information flows. They would love to be able to take my book off of all of the services, Barnes and Noble and Amazon and all of these websites. I mean, Jeff Bezos actually has been putting his fingers on the scales with Amazon and sort of making it very hard to find books like mine, or even flat out removing them. And so you can see these authoritarian impulses popping up in all kinds of different ways. Now, I have a lot on Elon Musk in the book. I mean, he's got a streak, a technocratic streak, but I got to give him credit. He has been a champion for free speech. That's why they're coming after him. The Biden-Harris administration has been going after him tooth and nail. Every business he owns is under scrutiny, investigation, all trumped up stuff, obviously, because if they had something, they'd shut him down. But I kind of owe it to Elon Musk. I got a lot of stuff on there on the Neuralink.
Let me interrupt. I want to interrupt you. Let's go back to your book. I struggled finding reason why people like George Soros wanted to negatively impact our country. And when I read your book, and it led me to The Naked Communist. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is why George Soros is funding these Democratic DAs, these Democratic governors, funding these protests on college campuses. And it really blew my mind. It came down to power and control. And then I read more about the Communist Party and their playbook. And one of the key tenets of the communist playbook is to basically gaslight, right? Blame the opponent for the exact things that they are doing and create confusion. And if you say it enough, the public, maybe the uneducated public, but the public, the masses will start to believe it. And that's basically what you're describing right now. Talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, certainly. So it blows the minds of, average Americans like you and me to realize that some of these people don't love America. They just don't love America like you and I do. I've got David Rockefeller, a quote from him in the book that says, some people believe that my family and me are working against the best interests of the United States, trying to form a one world government. If that's the charge, I am guilty of it. He admits it. And a lot of them admit it in all kinds of different ways. I mean, they think America's hopelessly racist or whatever it is. What the truth is they want to abolish borders. They want to abolish national sovereignty. They want a system of global control. They want to take power away from individuals, people like you and me in this audience, take it away from countries like ours, the United States, and transfer that power and control to international institutions that they control. Things like the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the United Nations, and all of these things. These sounded like conspiracy theories for decades. A lot of people have been talking about this for decades. Some of these books were written in the 60s and 70s that I cite in the book, but they've all proven true. George Soros and so many others, that's why he's flooding. That's why he funds the flooding of our borders with non-citizens. They want to create this society where nobody, is part, has any sort of history together, and we're all kind of united by a common thing, money, that like we're, just talking about gas prices or grocery prices, and there's no sort of heritage here. They want this system where we don't have anything in common except we're working to serve their profits.
What is the impact if Trump wins on Bezos, Gates, Soros, Zuckerberg, Schwab? What is the impact on them if Trump wins?
Well, see, and that's kind of where the left gets it wrong. They think that if you're a billionaire, you must be a right-winger, you must be a capitalist. If Donald Trump wins, there's going to be an economic boom. I mean, just like there was from 2016 until the pandemic. He just announced recently that we might want to do away with income taxes and replace it with tariffs. That will help so many people. I mean, a lot of these people will pay less taxes or their businesses will explode. A good economy helps billionaires typically, right, unless they're, George Soros types who are investing in demise. So why would they be so against him, as they all are? I mean, they're spending enormous amounts of money, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars against him. And that's because they don't like, a free system. They want a system. Kamala Harris will absolutely, come after free speech. John Kerry just said it. I mentioned earlier in the program. John Kerry talks about what a nuisance the First Amendment is. They don't like the First Amendment. You see it with Zuckerberg's Facebook, and a lot of the other control oligarchs have all these censorship-friendly policies. Bill Gates actually, just in the last month or so, was talking about what a problem free speech is and how misinformation is the biggest problem we face. They don't want people to be able to speak freely. They don't want programs like this on the air. And so that's why they're against, for one candidate and against the other.
Where do you see the election right now? If you were to call it, what do you say? What say you?
Yeah, well, it's tough. You can see what the polls are saying. The polls look very favorable in one direction. But you read this election threats report, the top 50 election threats report from the Government Accountability Institute, and it shows that, it really comes down to maybe 5 cities in 5 states. We're talking Atlanta, Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Phoenix, Arizona. It doesn't take many. It takes 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 is what the margin was in the last election. And so if they can flood those cities with all of these mail-in ballots, it's not too big. There's no such thing as too big to rig. I mean, we'll see. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll have some cleanup of all of these things. But I've looked at these states, these swing states. They have not cleaned their voter rolls up. I mean, we did a calculation. Texas and a couple of other places, North Carolina and others, have audited their voter rolls. They purged over 4 million ineligible voters. That's all in the last year. 4 million ineligible voters. The problem is none of them were in swing states. And these swing states, we've calculated, have over 1 million registered people to vote who should not be able to vote, or there's big problems there. So 1 million is an election swinging number.
We're getting down to the close here, but I wanted to ask you this because you mentioned a couple of things that you've written about, Kamala and the Chinese spy interference in an election back when she was Attorney General, and then Tim Walz, the service center with the Chinese police station. And I voted early. I voted last, I voted early. Then this news comes out. And so I sometimes feel that there shouldn't be early voting because a lot can happen in the last 2 or 3 weeks before an election that, if I'm on the fence, might impact my vote. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, early voting, I know it's convenient. We've got to get back to same-day voting. I mean, while we have early voting, absolutely use it to your advantage, make it convenient. But if you're on the fence, you really ought to wait and see and do all of your homework before you vote. And we have to get back to same day voting, not just because October surprises and all of that are fun, but because there's all kinds of wiggle room. I mean, you're hearing reports, it's looking pretty good for Trump here, or it's looking pretty good for Kamala there. That just gives people an opportunity to shore up their potential fraud activities. And so same day, the reason that they made it so that it's a month long or even longer in so many places is because it allows them to calculate how many votes they need to chase and all that. That's not how elections should be run. I mean, we currently have a system in the aftermath of the pandemic of we don't have elections anymore that are based on persuasion. We have ballot collection drives. Like this, it's whoever can collect the most ballots. It's not about persuading voters and winning their vote and convincing them that you've got the best policy. It's about how do we scare up as many votes and chase them out of the nooks and crannies and push our candidate over the edge. And that's not how elections should be run.
Listen, Seamus, I could go on and on with you. I appreciate you coming on the show. As we close, what question should I have asked you that I didn't?
I think you covered all the bases, Coach. Every time we talk, it's always a good time. So the only thing is we need more time. So hopefully I can come on more time. Yeah, I hope I didn't speak too fast here.
No. For a New Yorker, you're actually on pace. So no, you're all good. Oh, by the way, I went to my favorite tailor, OMJ, in Charlotte, North Carolina, and representing our country as we get into this election here in the coming days. Thank you for joining us today and giving us a great perspective on the state of our country and the politics and who's behind the scenes and really running things. We always appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Coach. That's a handsome coat. So I look forward to seeing you next time.